here we are. This is Sex Love Psychedelics, and I'm your host, Dr. Kat, bringing you psychosexual conversations that will leave you intellectually turned on and hungry for more. Speaking of sex, there's so much we can learn in that space. You know, I opened this conversation with talking about relationship dojo, and sex in and of itself is like a dojo, or like its own psychedelic ceremony of sorts, that we can meet parts of ourselves if we slow down and bring the conscious awareness to it. So how do you, let's go there. Like, how do you see it? Because I know you do. How do you see sex as a ceremony, or how do you see it as a place for transformation?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating question and one of my absolute favorite things to talk about. And there's so many different places that we can go here. For myself personally, I experienced pain in around the opening of my vagina was in when I was in my early 20s. And I started to experience more and more pain. And I went to all these specialists. I went to, pelvic floor physical therapists and gynecologists and urologists, and nobody could help me understand what was going on. And I was in a relationship at the time, and I actually went on a trip and I had a sexual experience with someone else, and I didn't experience pain.
Wow.
And so in that moment, I realized, oh, this is not just a physical thing. I thought, something was broken about my anatomy, but this was actually something that's happening for me psychologically. And so I realized that I needed to end the relationship that I was in. And it started my quest around really understanding what my body was trying to tell me. But it took me another probably 4 or 5 years of just feeling broken, going through a lot of experience of despair, experiencing a lot more pain, being terrified that I was never going to be able to have a long-term sexual relationship, until I was in a really beautiful meditation and I was invited to tune into my pussy as the gatekeeper of my body. And I realized in that moment I had not been a good gatekeeper for my body. I really struggled to experience intimacy when I was younger, and I went to sex when I was wanting to have intimacy. And so I had some sex that my body was not actually ready for, my soul was not ready for. And I wasn't paying attention to that. And the way that my body was telling me was to create this pain. And so I now have this really amazing check engine light in my body. And this was a literally a 7-year experience of really going through some very, very emotionally painful processes to understand, oh, my body wasn't working against me. My body was actually working for me. And once I was able to make that shift, I started to realize, okay, that pain that I feel in my pussy, which I still get sometimes, is a check engine light for me around how I might be out of alignment with myself. So that's maybe an extreme example. And in my research and this process that I've gone through, I understand that somewhere between 30 and 40% of women experience some pain during penetrative sex. And so for any women who are out there experiencing that, I really invite you to consider ways in which your body might be trying to convey a message to you. And it might also be more subtle, right? So it might be having trouble getting turned on. And I've experienced this, with women I've worked with and also with men that I've worked with. And there's so much stigma in our society for men about not being able to get an erection. Yeah. And what is your body trying to communicate to you in that moment? It is one of the hardest things that for me to do over the last decade. But when I made the switch from why won't my body get on board with what my mind wants it to do to, okay, my body is telling me something, and how can I then utilize my mind to support what my body needs to get me back into alignment? That is such an important switch. And to me, that's the baseline, that's the foundation for coming into sex as ceremony.
Yeah.
So really trusting anything that my body is telling me is right in that moment. And it's the entry point for me. It's the catalyst to tune into what wants to be released, what wants to be moved.
Hmm.
I have personally found for myself and through working with others that moving sexual energy through the body, whether that's actually having sex or just breathing and intentionally moving sexual energy through the body without any physical touch or penetration, that stirs stuff up, kind of like psychedelics do, right? It brings it up to the surface. And the way that I access that is through the physical sensations. It's through my availability to become aroused or not. And the way that I now experience my ability to become aroused after doing, a number of years of work around moving sexual energy through my body and practicing that is tuning into how easily is that energy flowing and where it gets stuck. So depending on what level of practice you're at with this, it can be with, okay, just noticing I'm not in the mood right now. Rather than trying to force myself to
Hmm.
get in the mood, can I just sit with myself? Can I meditate? Can I tune in specifically to different areas of my body? Breathe into different areas of my body? Notice the physical sensations. And then as you become more comfortable with that, really tuning into moving sexual energy on your own through the body, right? So I've done a lot of training with Western Neo Tantra, and the
Hmm.
most basic definition I have for Western Neo Tantra is the practice of intentionally creating and channeling sexual energy through the body. Pretty straightforward. Where it gets really interesting is where does that energy get stuck? And then we have all these practices for emotional release, right? Coming back to the breath, sound, movement to release and move them through our body and create more space for energy and aliveness to flow.
Yeah, yeah. And it's I think in our medical world, there's so much looking at these body responses and saying there's a dysfunction, there's something wrong with it. And here you're saying, A, you can empower yourself by breathing and moving that energy to open the body. But then it's also like, are you willing to be with the subtle experiences, the discomforts, the contractions, the flutters, and the words that come along with it that spontaneously arise when you tune into that discomfort. And so many people would rather take Viagra or would rather not go there or would rather just tell their partner, I'm too tired tonight, than go into the experience of these. I think, even in sex, like this, you can do this before sex, you can do this after sex, but there's also the potent um, potential here in sex of the subtle ways that we dissociate or the subtle ways that we contract or that we go wet or that we have pain or that we get distracted. And it's like all of these, none of these are necessarily something that is wrong with you, but has information in it if we tune into it and then we do the vulnerable act of expressing it and putting it into words to our partner or to ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, putting the vulnerable feelings into words in a sexual experience is definitely an Olympian level human relating skill. And there's so much power in that, right? I mean, I'll just speak to my experience as a woman and some of the work that I've done with women around sexuality is there's so much programming around our ability to please and give the men what they're wanting. Men are objectified in our society for their ability to provide, women are objectified in our society for our sexuality. So it can be very hard sometimes to separate our relationship to our own self worth and value from our relationship to our sexuality and our ability to please our
Hmm.
partners sexually.
Yeah.
And yet, I often tell the men that I work with that, very few women have really had the experience of being fully opened
Mm.
and what is possible from a pleasure perspective because oftentimes we're nervous. And I'm totally guilty of this as well. Nervous to speak up and say, oh, actually, that's too hard, that's too fast.
Mhm.
Whereas if, a man who's having sex with a woman, for example, were to go inside her really deep and just hold and allow her to breathe into the sensations and allow her body to relax and open and then slowly speed up, you absolutely have the potential to get to a place where penetration that's hard and fast and deep can feel incredible
Mhm.
if we honor the body and what the body needs to get there.
that was fun. Thanks for tuning in, lovers. And if you want to experience more ecstasy and sexual liberation, head over to sexlovepsychedelics.com and learn about how you can join me for any one of my online or live events. And while you're there, grab my free guide on sex and psychedelics. Remember, this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Please contact your healthcare provider and local law before pursuing any of the products or psychedelics discussed. And one final note here. I make this show specifically for you. If you're loving the show, then be sure to leave me a review in iTunes or Spotify to let me know. Happy to be here and happy to serve. I'll see you next time on Sex Love Psychedelics.